As our LGBTQ plus community grows, we not only learn the meaning of each of those abbreviations, but begin to understand that there is much more than that plus implies. For Native American Indians, that plus expands in meaning. Specifically, the Bay Area offers BAAITS, which is the Bay Area American Indian Two Spirits. Amelia Vigil, Two-Spirit Urban Indigenous Interim Executive Director of BAAITS, joins us for Outlook Video to tell us more. Welcome to Outlook Video, Amelia.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. It's a pleasure.
So I claim my Indigenous heritage on my mother's side and on my father's side. So on my father's side, it would be Pequotese Pueblo in northern New Mexico, Spanish Sephardic Jew, exiled from the Spanish Inquisition. And on my mother's side, it's Purapechin, Mexica, raised Chicano in the Bay Area here. And that's really important because we have to, in the position that I hold as interim executive director, the term interim is underscored here because I very openly am not tribally enrolled. So I would like to, uplift the fact that culture keepers, language practitioners are at the center of what BAAITS does in our community in supporting Two-Spirit people, Two-Spirit identified individuals. And to that point, it's important to also recognize that the Bay Area is on unceded territory of the Ohlone folks in San Francisco. It's the Ramaytush Ohlone, and then in Oakland, it's Lishan Ohlone.
Two Spirits is not just of the Bay Area, but it's all over the country, correct?
So the term Two-Spirit was adopted in 1997 from an intertribal international gathering that happens both in kind of oscillates its location from Canada to the US to Montana to the East Coast. And so it's actually an umbrella term that is a direct translation from an Anishinaabe word. So it's a relatively new term, and it was adopted by Two-Spirit identified folks for Two-Spirit identified folks in an intertribal community. And there's more there, but I'll pause.
Yes, there is indeed. And that's what I'd like to, one of the parts I'd like to present is that Two Spirits, when we think of spirit, we think of more than just the physical consciousness of a person, but also the spiritual consciousness of a person. So it not just necessarily just means someone who's gender identified, but multidimensional. Is that correct?
There are many different definitions to the term Two-Spirit, and you may ask, I'll have a definition, and BAAITS will have a definition, but I would say that generally non-Native and Native communities alike do pull in that spiritual aspect when it comes to this term. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and in watching the most recent powwow, well, let's talk about the powwow first. This is the 11th annual powwow for the Bay Area here in San Francisco at Fort Mason. I was able to watch a little bit of the powwow and watching the celebrations and the prayers and the blessings, which were absolutely wonderful, and to and hear and see all these different indigenous peoples and represented by their traditions, their costumes, their blessings, and their prayers. So please expand on the powwow and what it all entails.
Yeah, so a little bit there is, the regalia that you see is often, that's a sacred garment. There's a lot of time and love that's put into that. I think one thing to note is that, the powwow is based off an Oklahoma style powwow. In fact, California natives do not practice powwow as a social gathering or as contesting or competition. They practice something that's a bit more ceremonial from my understanding, and those are called big times. So this is another instance where, the powwow itself is, we want to recognize that that's not traditional to this area. But the deal here, if you don't know anything about powwow, definitely look into it, Google it. It's not a lot of non-natives kind of flippantly use the term as a way to say, let's powwow or let's come together. And that's actually a misuse of that term. Now that you all know that, please correct yourselves and anyone else, because
Thank you.
a powwow is a social gathering and there is contesting, and that contesting is done on multiple layers with the singers, the big drummers, the drummers, and the dancers. And there's many different dance categories. Now, what is different about what BAAITS Two-Spirit Powwow does is that we degender the dance categories. So
Yes, that's something else I wanted to bring up about the two spirits. Okay, thank you.
So we've eliminated the gender divide within contesting. And so, for instance, we allow for people of all identities to choose the style of dance that they want, that they are going to be dancing. And you also have to understand in powwow protocol, not just anyone can go out into the arena and purchase or make regalia and enter that space. There's actually a coming out, and your community needs to be behind you, and there's particular protocols that need to be established and met prior to entering a powwow arena and being allowed to dance.
I'm glad you brought that up as well, that you do have some protocol that to which you adhere. That's excellent to hear. Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah, it's not just BAAITS that's doing this protocol. These are old traditions across many different tribes. And we do have our elders who advise the BAAITS protocol, and we do have a planning committee every year. And one of our subcommittees is a protocol committee to make sure that we are doing things in the right way, in a respectful way, not only for the land that we're on, but for the individuals we're inviting to join us, for the cultural practitioners as well. One thing I do want to say is, I'd love to share BAAITS mission statement, because it speaks directly to the founding of this powwow 11 years ago. And so, Bay Area American Indian Two Spirits really exists to restore and recover the role of Two-Spirit people within the American Indian and First Nation communities by creating a forum of spiritual, cultural, and artistic expression of Two-Spirit people. So often in a tribal community where you sit around this circle with men on one side and women on the other, we're saying, who are those bridges? Who are those connections between men and women? And that are our Two-Spirit relatives.
I also like that you include an elder space and an elder speak. So that's also shows the value of elders. And I think that's very, very important in all cultures, but especially it's brought in high esteem with the indigenous and native peoples. So that's good to know.
I can't provide culture exchange as directly as a cultural practitioner or someone who is a language speaker can. And when we speak about American Indian and First Nation communities, we're talking about hundreds of different tribal protocols and languages and cultures that are federally recognized and non-federally recognized. And that, in our current dominant culture, what is seen as federally recognized tribes are those tribes that allied with the English during the Civil War, and that the tribes that allied with the French or that completely stayed out of it are often not recognized. And it's very much based on land and resources and water and the ways in which that land has been taken and stolen and continues to be upheld in federal court today through a document called the Doctrine of Discovery, which essentially was a document that, just Google it, it's still being upheld, that basically was like, hey, if you're not of this faith, if you're not of the Christian or Catholic faith, then you're therefore a heathen, therefore this is our land. My particular place within community at this point is really to try and do everything I can towards the mission of BAAITS and towards the visibility, and especially towards suicide prevention, because isolation is one of the leading killers of our communities, believing that and that rejection. So homophobia is a disease. It's a human-made disease, and there is a cure, and that's connection. And that's what we're offering here with the
Excellent, excellent.
powwow.
I think that's probably is an underlying mission statement is connection. Yes, I think
Yes.
that's excellent, and that's good in all cultures, and especially as a senior, it's good to connect with like-kind people and restore and revive all of the cultures. And I'm so happy that you've mentioned that. What do you see happening in the future with BAAITS?
Yeah, so BAAITS was founded out of a prayer, actually, from out of another organization called Gay American Indian. One of the main pillars of our organization is providing safe and sober spaces for our community. So that's very much at the core of what our organization offers. And we're in the 22nd year of this organization. Sally Ramon, some of our founders are still around, but Sally Ramon in particular, and Jean Hightower is still alive, but Sally Ramon has transitioned over to the spirit world. And, this organization was founded in order to host the International Two-Spirit Gathering. We are completely a volunteer-run organization. My interim position, which is on quarter time, was a position that I personally fundraised for in order to try and build a robust internal infrastructure and be able to fundraise for our first executive director, which we're currently about to launch the hiring process for. I've been able to secure capacity building funding in order to provide a salary for our first executive director and our first program manager, in hopes of taking BAAITS out of the glory of relying on our very generous, super open community that has sustained us for the last 22 years. And for a very long time, BAAITS was the only Two-Spirit powwow in the world, the only powwow, the first and only that ever allowed degendering of dance categories. Now we saw at Gathering of All Nations, which is one of the largest powwows, that they have invited Two-Spirit dancers back into the circle. We saw a couple of years ago, the Stanford powwow put the gay flag in the color guard during grand entry. We know that Winnipeg has a Two-Spirit powwow that they've put on a couple of years in a row now, and other organizations, other Indigenous, other First Nations, American Indian organizations are starting to see that happen.
Yes.
And that's from this powwow taking that first step.
How wonderful to see that snowball forward, and really, and you to be able to see the fruits of all these laborers. This is fantastic, and it's continuing. That is wonderful to hear. Oh,
so,
absolutely.
So again, I say this organization has been around way longer than I've been, and the hope is that it will be around way longer after. In 2021, we had to pivot to online, and that we had some 5 days of online programming. This year, we did that. We attempted to do a hybrid, both in-person, live stream, and online. We had to shut it down to non-singers and dancers, but they did get to, our community members who are singers and dancers and drummers did get to experience an in-person gathering at a smaller scale. And we hope to bring it back to its original form in person next year, pending the security that we can provide for our community.
You bet. Well, we certainly look forward to that, and learning more about our Indigenous Native Americans. Thank you so much for enlightening us and showing us the way. Thank you so very, very much. We really are honored to have you with us today, have you with BAAITS and doing this wonderful work. Thank you. Thank you for joining Outlook Video.
Appreciate it.
We love to get mail from you. Email us at comments@outlookvideo.org.
To contact us by phone, call 408-293-3040, extension 205.
Visit our website at outlookvideo.org.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/OutlookVideo.
And connect with us at facebook.com/OutlookVideo.
Pamela Busch was studying academics in New York City when they caught the wine bug in 1990 while working at Astor of Wines in that city. They shifted paths from academics to travel to San Francisco to become a sommelier, leading to open the legendary Haze and Vine Wine Bar. Continuing on that wine path, they started a wine school, the Grapes of Path. Moving right along, they opened Cav Wine Bar and Kitchen, one of San Francisco's finest restaurants. They also held the San Francisco Examiner wine writer position for 10 years. Pamela also started the Vinguard, dedicated to create more inclusive and equitable atmosphere in the wine industry. Pamela hosts the weekly program on KXSF, Fifth Way Radio, Queerly Drinking, which, quote, focuses on badass women and LGBTQIA people, and sometimes natural wines. They also serve as co-executive director of that station. Wow, Pamela, that's really something. Welcome to Outlook Video.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is terrific. Wow, what a journey you have experienced in your life so far. We want to hear all about it. And you coming to San Francisco and starting these wine things. Besides getting literally a taste of the wine, what opened up your horizons to the wine industry?
Well, I got into the industry. It was a hobby. And I was on my, as you mentioned, I was on my way to graduate school and I just got sucked into it. And I was very lucky because my first sort of legal wine job, I had worked illegally at a wine bar in London when I was studying there. But my first legal job in 1990 was working at Astor Wines and Spirits, as mentioned. And the wine buyer, Kevin McKenna, had a very eclectic, sort of like outside the box way of looking at wine. And that completely shaped me.
Well, in reading your bio, you said that the Vineyard is dedicated to create inclusive and equitable atmosphere in the wine industry. Is that something that is still in the making, or tell us a little bit more about that? Well, what does that entail?
Yeah, so when I first started the Vinguard in 2013, I started it as a natural wine blog, and the idea was, it was not just about like describing the wine tastes like this. I did a lot of that when I read for the Examiner. I was kind of just getting bored with that. And with the bigger picture issues in the industry were what was really concerning me most, especially around farming and the way that people were treated. And in 2015 is when I really started writing a lot about and talking a lot about sexism in the wine industry, where I was basically discriminated against because of my gender and I should say my age, and I also believe for being queer. And I decided that yes, we need to talk about all of the, all the discrimination that's been going on, and all the oppression that's going on. But also, we also need to build new power structures and create platforms for, initially I was mostly concerned with women, it was gender, but over time it's become much more inclusive. In 2018, I went into a graduate program at San Francisco State in education, equity, and social justice, because I knew where I wanted to take the Vinguard. I wanted the Vinguard really to become a nonprofit in the wine industry that dealt with issues of equity and creating opportunity and creating an atmosphere of belonging. So,
do you see that happening moving forward? And
I see. Well, with Vinguard? For the Vinguard, oh yeah, no, we continue to do, like, we have a new project that we're working on right now. It's called The People's History of the Wine Industry, which it's kind of based on the idea, comes from like the original, like the Howard Zinn book, A People's History of the United States. And then Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz wrote a book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And it's the idea is to uncover the stories of people who've worked in the industry from the very beginning. We started in 2019 a wine industry equity pledge, which is, it's evolved over time, and where it sits right now, it actually has its own website, and it's very built out, outlining different forms of discrimination and how they manifest in the wine industry. And anyone who signs has to come to a 1-hour introduction session and has to create 3 goals to work on over the course of a year. So it's not just like you sign and that's it. There's accountability in this pledge too. So that's something that we did.
Excellent.
Yeah, we have WINeFare, which that started in 2018. And that was to give women who work in the natural wine movement a platform for their work. The next one, we're going back to a live format again this year. It's going to be June 4th at the H Street Art Center. But, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday on my radio show about WINeFare and the need to have spaces that are, let's say, women only spaces, right? And WINeFare is not, to participate, to pour, you have to be female or non-binary, but anyone can attend. So it was to give women a platform for their work. Also, wine tastings can be an unsafe space for women because of sexual harassment, which it happens it happens in a lot of spaces, but you throw alcohol into the mix, it can get a little more dangerous too.
Along those lines, tell us a little bit about Somebody's Sister. This is something that is fantastic, that is along those specific lines you're talking about. Let's tell our audience
Sure,
about
and
that.
so Somebody's Sister Somebody's Sister is a pop-up like dyke, we call it dyke, lesbian, non-binary, trans, hella queer wine bar. And we did it, I'm doing it with Liz Rubin, who is the wine buyer at Buy Right Market. And we were having a conversation last spring talking about it. And so we did the first one in October at Malay, which is a great wine bar here in San Francisco. And then we did another one in November, and it was amazing. I mean, we had the first one, a couple hundred people came. There were people halfway down the block. And this coming Monday, March 21st, we're doing it again, and we're doing it at Minimo in Oakland, which is also a great wine bar that's owned by a queer woman. And I think the ideas will probably do one in Oakland and then 2 in San Francisco.
Although it is, dyke, lesbian, queer, sort of specific, but in non-binary and all, et cetera, et cetera. But you also say that no one's turned away, just you ask, and I think this is wonderful that you ask that people be respective of those, of the non-binary, queer, lesbian, dykes population while they're there.
Yeah. It is a space for queer and non-binary women. That doesn't mean you can't be an ally and come. I know a bunch of straight people who say they're coming on Monday. Totally welcome. All cool. And in the last 2 months, there have been people who are straight who've come. That's fine. But you got to know what it's about, And
Yes.
the difference, a big difference is like every other space. And this is, again, like trying to explain why you need to have spaces, let's say, that are women's spaces or that are queer spaces. Because every other space is basically about patriarchy. It's like,
It was
no,
great
this
is that you let it be known from the get-go. You let it known, you're welcome to come, but please be respectful. You're right. Well, I want to get to know about these badass women that you talk about in your radio show of Fifth Wave Radio, Queerly Drinking. Okay, you really got my curiosity there. So.
And I was thinking about this, and it's really the people who are on the show are women and or queer people who are doing things in their lives that are having a really good impact on other people and on the community. Yesterday, I had this woman, her name is Peggy Lee. She's the director of a space called The Ruby, which is a space, it is for women and non-binary creatives. It's a collective space in a mission. Very cool space. I went to their happy hour the other night and talked a bit about racism and anti-Asian racism and et cetera. And I think that, very often people who are doing cool things with their life, at least what I think are cool things with their life, have really interesting views on other subjects as well. And I like to get into those conversations. Next week, Alice Firing is going to be on the show. She is the foremost natural wine writer in the United States. She's been writing about natural wine since like the year 2000. And she has made a lot of waves. She has made, especially in the early days, she made people in the conventional wine world incredibly uncomfortable. But she wrote a book called How I Saved the World from Robert Parker. And when she wrote it, Robert Parker was an incredibly influential wine critic.
True.
She has, the kind of work she's done it's changed the game. I think that one of the beautiful things about natural wine is that it's not just about giving people wines to drink that are made in a way that is much more eco-friendly, but it's also and that have a pure, and that I think tastes a whole lot better. But it's also a different mindset about how you view wine, and I think how you view other things in life too. And that's why when we talk about natural wine and the natural wine movement, it does transcend it being about just a specific like beverage. Yeah, there are people I think who've done a lot of really cool stuff. Like Zoe Dunning was on my show. And what Zoe did as being like, the first, well, not the first, but she was like the second person. She might have been the first person to come out while she was in the armed services to come out. Abby, you know who Zoe is, okay?
Oh,
Like,
yes,
she's done
yes.
incredibly great, really great stuff. Like Jean Carstensen, who is a journalist who was covering Syrian refugees in Greece. There have been people on my show who I think I'm in like such awe of the work that they've done.
I enjoyed the show you recently had discussing a woman who did a documentary about lesbian bars, a lesbian bar project.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
is fantastic because that's something that we've lost over time. We've lost to women's bars, with lesbian specific bars. Please let our viewers know how they can watch your show. And if you have your website for Vinguard.
If you live in San Francisco, you can listen to it. It's on Wednesdays from 2 until 4 p.m. And I often have like an hour interview, and then I play a set list of music that's like performed or written by women and people who are queer. You can listen to that in San Francisco if you go to 102.5 FM. You can also stream it at KXSF.FM.
Okay, well, thank you for all this information. This has been terrific. A wonderful interview. You've given us lots of information, and especially for all of our lesbian viewers to get informed. Yes, you betcha. This has been fantastic. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Any veterans in the arena can come out and dance the colors out. We ask that you come and join any veterans.